The sun began its slow descent over the dry, cracked plains of Texas, casting a golden glow that turned the land into a sea of amber and crimson. The wind swept across the wide expanse, stirring up dust and debris, carrying with it the secrets of the Old West, whispers of love, loss, and survival. In the midst of it all stood Lorie Mayfield, her fists clenched tightly around a crumpled bundle of papers. The courthouse doors creaked behind her as she stepped onto the worn wooden steps, her boots making soft thuds as she crossed the threshold into a world that had suddenly become far colder and more distant than she had ever imagined. Lorie wasn't the type to cry. She was her father's daughter, a woman forged in the fires of the frontier. But today, the weight of the moment was undeniable. Her family's land, the land that had been passed down for generations, was slipping through her fingers like sand in the wind. She had fought hard to keep it. She had fought with every ounce of energy, every ounce of pride she had left. But it wasn't enough. The gavel had fallen. The decision had been made. Her father's legacy was gone. The papers in her hand weren't just legal documents. They were the weight of a lifetime's worth of memories. Her father's sweat, his blood, the land that had been tilled by his hands. And now, it wasn't hers anymore. She could feel the ground shifting beneath her feet, and the thought of losing everything she had ever known, everything her father had worked so hard to build, filled her chest with an emptiness that was almost too much to bear. Lorie didn't look back as she crossed the street, her heart heavy with loss. She had come to this courthouse for one thing, to keep the land that was her birthright. But the system had failed her. The law didn't care about her history. It didn't care about the land her father had built from the ground up. The law cared about deeds, about contracts, about papers that were signed long before she was even born. As she walked toward her horse, the sound of boots approaching her stopped her in her tracks. She looked up to see a figure standing in her path. Thatcher Boon, the wealthiest rancher in the county, a man whose name was synonymous with power, influence, and cold logic. He had been watching her from a distance, and now he was standing there, tall and unyielding, blocking her way. "You here to ask for your land back, Miss Mayfield?" Thatcher's voice was low, almost too calm, as if he had already seen this moment coming. His eyes held no judgment, just a quiet curiosity. Lorie didn't respond right away. Her mind raced, thoughts swirling like the dust in the wind. This wasn't how she imagined her life would go, standing here, facing a man like Thatcher Boon. But there was something about his presence that grounded her, something that told her he wasn't here to mock her. He wasn't here to watch her fail. "I came to fight for my home," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "I came to fight for what's mine." Thatcher studied her for a moment longer before speaking, his voice a calm, measured tone. "And you'll continue fighting, but there's a better way. If you want to keep your land, Miss Mayfield, you must marry me." Introducing Lorie Mayfield. Lorie Mayfield had always been different from the other women in the small Texas town. She wasn't the delicate, demure type you often found in the bustling frontier. She wasn't here to serve or to be saved. She was born to fight, to stand on her own 2 feet and carve out her place in the world, just as her father had done before her. Her childhood was one of labor, not luxury. From an early age, she had learned the value of hard work. Her father had taken her under his wing, teaching her everything she needed to know about running a ranch. They had built their life together, hand in hand, side by side, in a way that was rare for women of her time. While other girls her age were learning how to cook and clean, Lorie was learning how to saddle a horse, mend fences, and tend to the cattle. She wasn't just the daughter of a rancher, she was the backbone of their operation. But all of that had changed the day her father died. The land that had been their life's work, that had been the center of their universe, was now up for grabs. And as much as Lorie wanted to deny it, she knew she was fighting a losing battle. She had no brothers to inherit the ranch, no uncles to step in and help. She was alone, and the law had already ruled in favor of the Boon family. As the only heir to the land, Lorie didn't just see the ranch as property. She saw it as a memory, a piece of her father, a piece of their history that had been passed down through the generations. To her, losing the land meant losing her father all over again. It wasn't just about dirt and crops. It was about everything that had come before and everything that was at stake. But being a woman in a world where men ruled meant that Lorie had always had to fight harder. She had been taught to hold her own, to never let anyone see her weakness. Her pride was her greatest ally and her greatest downfall. The law didn't care about pride. The law didn't care that she had worked as hard as any man to build the ranch. It only cared about deeds, about legalities, about ownership. Now, standing in front of Thatcher Boon, Lorie had to face a harsh truth. Her father's legacy was slipping away, and all she had left was the option of marrying a man she barely knew, a man who saw her as little more than a business transaction. But Lorie wasn't the type to back down. If this was the way to keep her home, then she would do what it took. The unexpected proposition. The sun was just beginning to set as Lorie made her way toward Boon Ranch. The long ride had given her plenty of time to think. Think about her options, think about her father's legacy, and think about what was at stake. Thatcher Boon was a man of wealth and power, and he held the keys to everything she had worked for. But the idea of marrying him, of tying herself to him in such a way, made her stomach twist. When she reached the gates of Boon Ranch, she saw him standing there, as she had expected. Thatcher was tall and broad-shouldered, his stance exuding confidence and control. He didn't move when he saw her approaching. He simply stood there, waiting, as if he already knew what she was about to say. Lorie dismounted, her boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. She didn't know what to expect from him, but there was one thing she was certain of. She wasn't here to make friends. This was a business transaction. It was a matter of survival. "I came," she said, her voice steady. "You're offering me a deal. A marriage." Thatcher nodded, not surprised by her response. "That's right. A marriage to keep your land." Lorie took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "I don't know what you want from me, Boon. I'm not some pawn in your game." "I never said you were," Thatcher replied evenly. "But this is the only way you can keep your home. You know that. I'm offering you a choice. You marry me, and I'll make sure your father's legacy stays intact. Without it, you'll lose everything." Lorie felt a pang in her chest as the truth hit her squarely. She didn't want to marry this man, but she had no other choice. She had no lawyer, no money, and no way to win the land back through legal means. If she wanted to keep it, she had to accept the terms. "Fine," Lorie said, her voice quiet but firm. "I'll marry you, but don't think for a second that this changes anything. I'm doing this to keep my home, not because I want to." Thatcher's expression softened, but only slightly. "I'm not asking you to love me. I'm asking you to survive." The marital agreement. The town mayor's office was quiet. The Ket wooden floor creaked under Lorie's boots as she entered, the echo of each step making her feel more like a visitor in a strange world. The dust in the air seemed to hang heavy in the room, but nothing in that office felt more out of place than her presence. Thatcher Boon was beside her, calm and steady, as they both approached the desk where the mayor, an older man with graying hair and a slow, methodical way of speaking, waited. "Are we ready?" the mayor asked, looking between the two of them, his gaze lingering a moment longer on Lorie, as if waiting for something. She wasn't sure if it was for her approval or for the moment to pass. Thatcher nodded, and without further word, they sat. Lorie felt the weight of the room closing in on her. This wasn't the wedding she had ever imagined. There were no flowers, no guests, no vows whispered with love. There was only the business of survival. The mayor slid the marriage contract toward them. The ink was already dry, and the paper felt cold beneath Lorie's fingertips as she reached for the pen. This was it. There was no turning back now. She wasn't just marrying Thatcher for herself, she was marrying him for her father's land, for everything that had once been theirs. The pen scratched against the paper, and for a moment, Lorie thought she could hear her father's voice in her head. "Never sign anything unless it's truly yours, Lorie," he had always said. But here she was, signing her name on a document that would change the course of her life forever. She wasn't signing for love, for partnership. She was signing to keep her father's legacy alive, to keep the land she had grown up on. As she placed her signature at the bottom of the paper, her eyes lingered on the words. "This marriage shall be binding until the land dispute is resolved," it read. Her heart sank as she realized that the words meant nothing. This wasn't a union born of love. This was a contract, a simple transaction. Beside her, Thatcher was silent. His hand hovered over the paper before he signed his name with no hesitation. There was no sense of ceremony in his actions, no joy in completing this step. It was just business that had to be done. The mayor took the papers and stamped them with the town's seal, and suddenly, the world seemed to stop moving. The weight of the deal settled into Lorie's chest, and she felt the finality of it. They were married not because of love, not even because of mutual respect, but because survival demanded it. The mayor looked up, his eyes briefly meeting Lorie's with an almost apologetic look. "You're both bound now," he said softly, his words lacking the usual enthusiasm of a wedding ceremony. "May it work out for you both." Thatcher stood, offering Lorie a glance, his eyes not filled with triumph, but something else, something softer, almost like an unspoken understanding. He wasn't offering her love, but something that might grow into it. He wasn't offering her security, but a chance to hold on to what mattered. Lorie didn't say a word as she stood, nodding to the mayor as she left the office. The world outside was still the same, but everything in her life had changed in that instant. She was bound to Thatcher Boon, not by a promise of love or affection, but by the need to survive. And that was enough for now. Thatcher's unexpected gestures days turned into weeks, and Lorie found herself slowly adjusting to her new reality. Thatcher wasn't an easy man to understand, and she wasn't sure what to make of him. He was polite but distant, never pushing her boundaries but always making sure she had what she needed. The strange arrangement between them was beginning to feel like a routine rather than a new life. One morning, Lorie was startled when she found a man standing outside her cabin, holding tools in his hand. "Mr. Boon sent me," the workman said, tipping his hat. "The roof needs fixing." Lorie froze for a moment, unsure how to respond. "I didn't ask for any help," she said, her voice guarded. The man smiled gently. "It's not charity, ma'am. It's in the agreement." With that, he turned to begin his work, leaving Lorie standing in the doorway, a knot of pride and reluctance in her chest. She hadn't asked for the repairs, but they were necessary. The roof was leaking, and the cold winds would only worsen when winter arrived. But the idea of Thatcher's hand in this, that a man who had no reason to care about her comfort was taking steps to ensure she didn't suffer, was almost too much to process. As the days passed, more workmen arrived. The barn door needed replacing. The fence needed mending. Each time, Lorie resisted the help, but each time, Thatcher's workers continued their work with the same quiet determination. It wasn't charity. It wasn't an offer of friendship. It was simply the practical reality of their agreement. Thatcher was doing what needed to be done, and Lorie had to admit that she didn't know how to feel about it. She had never been one to rely on anyone, and the idea of relying on a man like Thatcher Boon was almost insulting. But the repairs were necessary. The cabin needed work. The ranch needed work. And Thatcher wasn't doing this to win her favor. He wasn't trying to soften her heart or make her feel indebted. He was simply making sure she could continue to hold her ground. But Lorie couldn't ignore the subtle shift in their dynamic. Thatcher's quiet presence around the ranch was starting to feel less like an intrusion and more like a partnership. Whether she wanted to admit it or not, Thatcher was showing her a kind of respect that she hadn't expected. It wasn't about control, it was about survival. Together, the growing respect. As the weeks turned into months, Lorie began to notice something changing between her and Thatcher. It wasn't love, not yet, anyway, but there was a growing sense of respect, something she hadn't expected to find in a man like him. Lorie had always prided herself on being self-sufficient. She had been taught from a young age that relying on others was a weakness, that she had to be strong, independent, and capable. But Thatcher had a different approach. He didn't need her to rely on him, but he was there, quietly working beside her, offering his help when it was needed. He wasn't trying to control her. He was simply doing what needed to be done, and in doing so, he was earning her respect. One day, Thatcher arrived at the ranch early, before the sun had fully risen, and began to dig a new well. The old one had dried up, and the water was no longer fit for use. Lorie had noticed it for weeks, but hadn't had the strength to tackle it alone. Without asking, without even discussing it, Thatcher had come to fix it. Lorie watched him from a distance as he worked. The sight of him, bending over the ground, sweat on his brow, was oddly compelling. There was no fanfare, no need for thanks. He was simply doing what needed to be done. And for the first time, Lorie realized something. Thatcher wasn't just a rich rancher. He wasn't just a man who had bought her land. He was a man who understood the value of hard work, of doing what needed to be done, no matter the personal cost. When Lorie went out to check on him, she stood silently for a moment before speaking. "You didn't have to do this," she said, her voice soft. "I know," Thatcher replied without looking up, his hands steady as he continued digging. "But it needed to be done." Something shifted in Lorie's chest as she stood there, watching him. It wasn't love, but it was something deeper, something that couldn't be ignored. For the first time, she realized that the man she had married wasn't a monster, nor was he a hero. He was simply a man who understood respect. And in that understanding, something was beginning to grow between them. The hidden truth. It was a cold, quiet evening when Lorie stumbled upon the truth that had been quietly hiding in plain sight. The fire crackled softly in the hearth as she sat near the warmth of the flames, sorting through the papers her father had left behind. The journal had been a place where her father had scribbled notes about everything: planting seasons, tools, crop yields, and even random thoughts he'd had while working the land. As her fingers turned the pages, one caught on something unexpected: a folded piece of paper, tucked carefully between two pages. Her heartbeat quickened as she unfolded it, recognizing the familiar handwriting of the attorney who had drawn up the marriage contract. Lorie's hands trembled as she scanned the paper. It wasn't the first time she had seen the terms of her marriage agreement. In fact, she had signed it without hesitation, thinking it was merely a means to an end, an arrangement made in the name of survival. But this paper, this one was different. It was a draft of the very marriage contract she had signed with Thatcher. Her eyes scanned the legal jargon quickly, her stomach tightening with each word. The agreement wasn't just about land ownership. It was a clear transaction, a cold business deal. It stated explicitly that the land she was holding on to, the land her father had worked so tirelessly to protect, would remain in Thatcher's control unless it was secured by marriage. It was written that the contract would hold until the land dispute was resolved, and that Lorie's role was that of a wife by title only, a mere tool in a larger game. The harsh realization hit her like a freight train. She had always known that the marriage wasn't born from love. She had always known it was a way to keep her family's legacy alive. But seeing it in black and white, seeing the cold, hard truth about why Thatcher had married her, was too much to bear. She wasn't his equal. She was just a means to an end, a way to settle a legal dispute. Her emotions flared as the anger rose in her chest. She had been so sure, so determined to fight for her father's land. But now it seemed like everything she had believed about her marriage to Thatcher was built on a lie. The land wasn't hers to keep, it was his to control, and she was just a pawn in his game. She marched straight to him the following morning, the contract in her hand, her heart pounding with a mix of fury and disbelief. "How could you not tell me?" she demanded as she stood in front of him. "You said this wasn't about the land, but it was. From the start, it was all about ownership." Thatcher, who had been working on the property, didn't flinch. He wasn't defensive, wasn't apologetic. He simply stood there, listening to her words. When she finished speaking, he took a long breath, his expression unreadable. "I didn't want you to know, Lorie," he admitted, his voice low. "I didn't want you to feel like you were nothing more than a piece of paper. But the truth is, it started as a transaction, yes, but it became more than that." Lorie stared at him, her heart twisting. "Then why didn't you tell me the truth?" "Because I didn't want to lose what we were building. I didn't want you to turn away because of a contract," he said softly, his gaze holding hers. "I didn't want you to think I saw you as just a solution to a problem." Lorie stood still, absorbing his words. It wasn't an apology, but it was something that made her question everything she had thought about him. "I thought we were building something real," she said, her voice quieter now, her anger replaced with a deep ache. "We are," Thatcher said firmly, "and I'm sorry for not telling you sooner. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but know that this," he gestured between them, "isn't just a deal anymore. I didn't expect to care about you, Lorie, but I do." It wasn't the answer Lorie had expected, and it wasn't perfect, but it was the truth. The weight of the contract, the lie, was still there, but somehow she felt lighter. Maybe not everything had been as it seemed, but the respect between them was real, and for now, that would have to be enough. The harvest gathering. The air had cooled considerably by the time the harvest gathering rolled around, and the streets were alive with the hustle and bustle of townsfolk preparing for the event of the season. It was a tradition that went back generations, a way to mark the end of a long year of hard work and to celebrate the fruits of that labor. But this year, it felt different. Thatcher had been absent from the gathering for years, a man known more for his business dealings than for his participation in town events. But this year, he had decided to attend, and not just by himself. He had invited Lorie. She was caught off guard. She had never imagined Thatcher, the stoic, silent rancher, would ever ask her to accompany him. After all, they were still newly married by law only, with no shared history of affection or love. But here he was, asking her to stand beside him in front of everyone. The night of the gathering, Lorie hesitated. She had never been one to care about public opinion, but tonight felt different. People would notice her. They would judge her. Some would whisper. Some would stare. A woman like her, marrying a man like Thatcher, would surely become the talk of the town. But when Thatcher looked at her that evening, his expression unreadable, she knew this wasn't about others. It wasn't about appearances or how the town would perceive them. This was about the two of them, standing together, whether anyone approved or not. The barn was already alive with music and laughter when they arrived. As they stepped through the door, every eye turned to them. The whispers started almost immediately, and Lorie felt the familiar sting of judgment. But Thatcher didn't care. His hand was firm on her back, his gaze unwavering as he led her to a seat by his side. When people tried to speak down to Lorie, Thatcher shut them down without hesitation. "She's not just my wife," he said, his voice strong and unyielding. "She's my partner." Lorie's heart swelled with an emotion she hadn't expected. She wasn't just a woman married for convenience anymore. She was his equal, and that, more than anything, meant something. They didn't dance like lovers, but they moved together, side by side. Neither of them knew the steps, but they didn't need to. Their connection was built on something deeper than social graces. It was built on respect, on understanding. And for the first time, Lorie realized that maybe, just maybe, this marriage could become something more than a deal. The truth comes out. The morning after the harvest gathering, Lorie woke early, the glow of the sunrise casting long shadows across the land. The night had been long, filled with awkward glances and whispered comments from the townsfolk, but Thatcher had stayed by her side, unwavering. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, not just between them, but within herself. For the first time, she didn't feel like an outsider. But as she sat at the table, flipping through the contract, the weight of the truth settled heavy on her heart. She had been married to Thatcher for survival. She had agreed to this deal because it was the only way to keep her father's land, to hold on to the only thing that mattered. But now, after everything, she was left wondering if there could be something more between them. She found herself walking to the barn, finding Thatcher just as the sun broke through the horizon. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice quieter than she intended. "Why didn't you tell me the truth about this marriage, Thatcher?" Thatcher didn't answer immediately. He simply stood there, looking at her, his gaze intense. He had admitted once before that he didn't want to lose her, but today, it was different. Today, he didn't want to lose her again. "It started as a transaction," he said finally, "but it's become something more. I never wanted you to feel like a pawn, but I didn't know how else to keep you." The silence between them stretched for a moment before Lorie finally spoke, her voice steady. "I thought I was just a loophole in your game, but I'm not. I never was." Thatcher stepped toward her, his hand reaching out, not in a gesture of possession, but of understanding. "You're not just a loophole, Lorie. You never were. I'm sorry for not telling you sooner, but you've always been more than that to me." Lorie stood still, not sure of what to say next, but for the first time, she realized that the marriage wasn't just a contract. It was the beginning of something real, the final vow. That night, after the day's work had ended and the stars were beginning to light up the night sky, Thatcher found Lorie sitting by the fire, her face illuminated by the flickering flames. He approached her slowly, holding a small wooden box in his hand. Lorie looked up at him, wondering what he could possibly have to say now. But when he opened the box and revealed a simple silver ring, her breath caught in her throat. The ring was far from perfect, its edges a little rough, its design simple. But as Thatcher knelt before her, his voice steady and sincere, Lorie felt something she had never expected. "Will you be my wife?" he asked softly, not as a business agreement, but as a promise. Lorie's heart raced. She had never expected this moment, but in that quiet, sacred moment, she realized something that would change everything. She wasn't marrying for survival anymore. She was marrying because, despite it all, she had found something real. "Yes," she whispered. In every sunrise, Thatcher slid the ring on her finger, and in that moment, the land, the contract, the history of it all, faded into the background. What mattered now was the promise they had made not just on paper, but in their hearts.